In the last 15 years, the planet has not got less green, it's got more green. And not only a little bit more green, stunningly more green. 15% essentially in 15 years. And that's an area bigger than the continental United States. And that's happened pretty much everywhere in the world. And then you might say, well, where is that happening? And perversely, and contrary to all predictions, it's happening in the drier areas of the planet, especially in semi-arid areas. And here's the reason. So plants have to breathe, and to breathe, they have to open pores on their surface. And the problem for plants when they breathe with these pores is that they also allow water to evaporate from their internal structures. And so the less carbon dioxide in the air, the more the plants have to open their pores, and that means the more susceptible they are to drying out. And that means that they struggle to exist in semi-arid areas. Now, what's happened as a consequence of increased carbon dioxide production is that plants can breathe easier, and so they don't have to open their pores to the same degree. And what that has meant is that the very desert areas, at least the semi-arid areas, that the climate apocalypses were claiming would expand and spread, so the desertification of the world, the exact opposite has happened. And the Sahara Desert, for example, has shrunk to quite a stunning degree. And not only is the planet 15% greener than it was in 2000, but there are more trees in the Northern Hemisphere than there were 100 years ago, and as well as the planet greening. And so you can think about that as a victory on the objective front for the natural world. At the same time the planet has greened, because it's easier for plants to survive, our food crops have become much more productive for exactly the same reasons. And so as carbon dioxide output has increased, the planet has got, not only has the planet got greener, it's got greener in the driest areas, which is absolutely stunning and remarkable. And one of the consequences of that increased greening is that our agricultural production has become not less efficient, but much more efficient. And so I'm really wrestling with how to conceptualize that particular set of statistics.
I just thought of an idea. I've never thought of this before, so we're just trying it right now. But I think maybe we can think of three conceptions of the Earth which capture everything we're talking about. So my primary conception is evaluating the Earth from the perspective of human flourishing. How hospitable to human beings is it? And this includes like a lush, green, beautiful world for us to enjoy for many of the reasons you've talked about. But then the second one could be looking at the Earth in terms of just pure biological productivity. So just not even focusing on humans, just how much life is on the planet. And this captures what you just mentioned with rising CO2 levels, making a greener planet. But then the third one, and I think this is really the core of the modern environmental movement, is an unimpacted planet. So you're not optimizing for biological productivity, you're optimizing for minimal impact. And I think that is really the core of the modern environmental movement. It's not this just blanket collective desire for as much life as possible, and we're somehow getting in the way of that. It's specifically against us. And I think you brought up the perfect example, which is the climate catastrophe movement's total non-interest in kind of the obvious biological productivity benefits of more CO2. And this was not shocking or stunning. This is exactly what was predicted by the people who discovered the greenhouse effect. When they discovered the greenhouse effect, they said, this is going to, on its own, make the Earth a much more lush place. They speculated like the fruits are going to be bigger and everything is going to be lush because we're going to have more farmland and more biological. And it's kind of obvious. If you have a warmer world with more CO2, it's a more tropical world with more life. It's a more green world in the life sense of green, and yet the green movement hates it because we caused it. So they can see no good in anything we caused, even when it leads to more biological productivity. So I think what you're bringing up really shows it's fundamentally an anti-human movement, not a pro-life of any kind.
Right. Okay, but let's talk about that idea of impact. It's like, well, what is this hypothetical perfect world that exists statically that would be pristine and morally valuable in the absence of human beings? I mean, the biosphere is a dynamic place, obviously, over any time scale, and there's shift in what constitutes, quote, the environment. There seems to be this presumption that at some point in the past, when there was minimal human activity, the Earth was somehow optimized in the biological but also the moral sense, and that any change in that whatsoever in any direction, hence climate change, let's say, rather than global warming, any change in that whatsoever is to be regarded axiomatically as evil. But what that essentially means, as far as I can tell, the ineluctable conclusion that has to be drawn from that proposition is that any human activity whatsoever is to be regarded as evil on the face of it. It doesn't matter what it does.
Yes.
And your point is that means even if it increases total biological flourishing in terms of, like, let's say, the net metric tonnage of biological life on the planet. And so that's also perverse, because that is definitely a game that none of us can win. If the a priori rule is no matter what you do, you're evil, then the only solution to that is, well, how about a hell of a lot fewer of you? But then you say, well, what's that supposed to serve? Because if what we're doing now is actually making the planet more green, and I'm saying that very carefully because I know that that's not a sufficient metric. I am very concerned with issues, let's say, or conscious of issues that are relevant, like the potential loss of biodiversity, and also the overfishing of the oceans, let's say. So even though the planet is becoming greener, that doesn't mean that there are no mistakes we're making on the environmental front. But those mistakes have to be differentiated out, and they're all addressable. And, as we get richer too, and we can do more with less, and our agriculture becomes more efficient if we can manage that, that also means, even by the standards of the environmentalists themselves, that we'll be able to set aside reasonably large tracts of land and water to maintain them in something approximating a pristine and untouched state. I mean, that's certainly something that should be done on the oceanic management front. I mean, the data that I know suggests that if we set aside a certain percentage of the coastal area as marine protected areas, and that might not be the most efficient way to manage the oceans, but it's not bad, that we'll reap the benefits of having untouched nature, so to speak, which is an aesthetic and economic and environmental good, but we'll also be able to replenish the oceans in a manner that would be economically productive. And so, well, like, why the hell can't we have our cake and eat it too then? Is we can help people become rich with the provision of plentiful energy, and then we can put aside tracts of the world so that they're relatively untouched, so that biology can do its thing. And like, what the hell is the problem with that precisely?
Well, so I think you're pointing to something really good and something really bad. Something really good is why my new book is called Fossil Future, Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal, and Natural Gas, Not Less. But part of it does talk about we can increase all of these biological things. We can have a much more lush world. We can enjoy nature much more. This is fundamentally good news. The more energy we have, the more control we have over Earth, and the more we can make everything about it better for our purposes, including aesthetic things that poor people can't possibly be confused by. But the bad thing here is it's really highlighting the nihilism of this view that human impact is bad. And again, I really think the view is not that we want a lush environment and human beings are getting in the way of that. We want biological productivity and human beings are getting in the way, because as you're pointing out, they are opposing all human impact, including obvious things that make the world better. And so it really is the view that if we did it, it's bad. And you ask something like, what is it serving? But it's a nihilistic view. So it's not really serving anything. Even when you think about unimpacted nature, it's not this beautiful thing for us to enjoy. It's supposed to be protected from us. So that's really the view.
Including our enjoyment.
We are this evil. Of course, our enjoyment is of no consequence whatsoever. And in Fossil Future and in Moral Case, I have a lot of quotes from the leaders where they'll occasionally let this slip out, where one guy, for example, who was reviewing Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, talks about, like, a flourishing biosphere is more important to me than one human or a billion of them.